What?
The Ennead. You know, like the supergroup of Egyptian gods. You know, you got Horus, Osiris, Tefnut, Shu.
Stop.
Welcome back, Screen Crush. I'm Ryan Airy. In the show Moon Knight, ancient Egyptian gods like Ammit and Konchoo were able to choose human beings to perform their will on Earth. They endow these humans with some of their energy and powers, and the people change physically to take on their form. These beings are called avatars. Now, an avatar means a representation of some greater power, and believe it or not, we've actually already seen an Egyptian avatar in the MCU, the Black Panther. Think about it. The Wakandans worship an Egyptian god, Bast.
A warrior shaman received a vision from the Panther goddess Bast,
Bast gave the first prophet a vision that led him to the heart-shaped herb,
who led him to the heart-shaped herb,
which gives people powers. So the legacy of the Black Panthers was born. Generations of humans began to act as the avatar of Bast, and in return they were given supernatural abilities to live on after their deaths and communicate with the living. Now, all of this is pretty cool, and it means that potentially the events of Moon Knight can lead into Black Panther Wakanda Forever, and the return of certain characters from the dead. But to understand this connection, first we have to understand exactly what these Egyptian gods are. Then we can know the full extent of their powers. Now, we already have previous godlike figures in the MCU, the Norse Gods, the Eternals, and a lot of others come to mind. But how do they connect to the larger Marvel Cinematic Universe? Now, in this franchise, we've seen several different definitions about what it means to be referred to as a god.
I am a god, you dull creature.
Puny god.
And we're not going to be talking about the gods that are worshipped in modern day, like the Super Best Friends.
On the Super Best Friends power cycles!
We know that Kamala Khan is a practicing Muslim and that Steve Rogers says,
"There's only one God, man, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that."
But for this video, we're only going to be talking about the old gods to figure out what these Egyptian gods actually are and why they're meddling in human affairs. You see, we think that Falcon puts it best when he says,
"The big three." What big three? Androids, aliens, and wizards.
These are the fundamental categories of higher powers within the MCU, who we see call themselves gods. Androids, wizards, and aliens. Now, the idea of androids being called gods does seem pretty scary future cyberpunky, but chronologically, the first sighting of gods for the humans were the Eternals. They were created by the celestial Ereshkigal, the judge, in the World Forge, which looks to be either a small planet or a star like Nidavellir. Ereshkigal specifically says,
It is here that I built and programmed the Eternals.
Basically stating that they are humanoid robots, ergo androids. Throughout history, the Eternals have traveled around the world to areas that had no protection, starting in 5000 BC in Mesopotamia, all the way to the fall of the Aztec Empire. They used their powers to nurture human society, which made ancient humans deify them. Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia, Kingo in Babylon, Makari in Rome, Druid in the Celtic lands, Sprite in Europe, and Athena, Phastos, Icarus, Ajax, Circe, all in Greece. But there were two places that did not need their powers or protection: Scandinavia and Africa. Scandinavians already had the Norse gods to protect them, and Wakandans had Bast, but more on both of them a little later. The Eternals steered clear of those areas, but they were definitely aware of their fellow almighty interlopers. Kingo even mentions,
"Speaking of Odin, Thor used to follow me around when he was a little kid. Now he's a famous Avenger and won't return my calls."
Now, the Egyptian gods could be androids like the Eternals. The Egyptians had similar processes of deification and similar pantheons like the Greeks, where most of our Eternals were worshipped. See, the Egyptian gods have agents who perform their will on Earth. In ancient Egypt, these were called cultists, like the group that follows Hera. But in the MCU, they also anoint superpowered avatars, like Hera or Moon Knight. Thousands of years ago, Ammit's avatar betrayed her, just like the Eternals also went against their mission and betrayed Ereshkigal. The Eternals and the Egyptian avatars also bear similar burdens. In the Moon Knight comics, Mark Spector's mind fractures under the power of Khonshu, leading to his dissociative identity disorder. And in the Eternals, Athena goes through a similar affliction called Mad Weary, when her multiple mind erasures begin to catch up to her.
Your mind is fracturing under the weight of your memories.
Now, it is possible, in theory, that Bast could be some sort of all-powerful AI like the Supreme Intelligence in Captain Marvel.
Serve well and with honor.
Maybe the Wakandan afterlife is just Bast uploading the brainwaves of people to a big server. This would mean that the heart-shaped herb is actually growing nanobots that the Black Panthers ingest for their minds to be uploaded to the Bast Matrix. But if this were the case, I think Shuri would have detected the nanobots. Also, androids don't seem likely to be the Egyptian gods because they lack telepathy and mysticism. The Eternals were manufactured in a forge, so Thena's mind fracturing is more like my used iPhone 6 needing to live next to my wall charger, whereas the fracturing in Mark's mind is caused by him turning his secret identities into actual personalities. So, what about wizards? They are godlike beings who use mysticism and telepathy. Well, for the Egyptian gods to fall under the category of wizards, they would either need to originate on Earth or come from a different dimension. Remember, Doctor Strange and the other sorcerers are able to do magic because it's energy that they're pulling from other dimensions. And by the way, I know I said wizards earlier, but in this video I'm going to stick to the term sorcerer because, as Falcon once put it,
A sorcerer is a wizard without a hat.
Now, these wizard types of gods are more supernatural, and their main weapons are magic and belief. For instance, in the book and TV series American Gods, or any series by author Rick Riordan, human faith actually creates the physical gods. So, in American Gods, ancient Norsemen prayed to Odin, which made Odin into a real guy who walks the earth.
What you mean walk the earth? You know, like Caine in Kung Fu.
The power of these gods is determined by how much people believe in them. For instance, in American Gods, someone states that Jesus does great in America, but in the Middle East, somebody saw him hitchhiking. In the Percy Jackson series, Hermes thrives delivering mail around the world, but the nature god Pan starts to fade because of increased pollution and disregard for the environment. These are beings who feed off the faith of human beings. In the MCU, this is similar to mystical beings like Dormammu, who has his cult of worshippers led by Caecilius. But also, let's think about Wanda. As the Scarlet Witch, she is a Nexus being and a user of chaos magic. She is a wizard-like entity who was worshipped by cultists. She even has an entire chapter devoted to her in the Darkhold. And then there's the 10 rings used by Wenwu. They would also be considered a magic godlike item. They were found in a cave on Earth, and their power is known among magical beings from different dimensions, such as the Dweller in Darkness and the residents of Ta Lo.
Is he wearing the rings?
Wong,
the Sorcerer Supreme,
even senses them with his mystical abilities. So, are the Egyptian gods wizards? Well, Khonshu and Ammit both have powers to host avatars, which seems mystical. The power that the Wakandans received from Bast could also be seen as magical. She gave them the heart-shaped herb, which gave them visions that allowed them to communicate with the afterlife. Bast is also the Egyptian god of cats. The Wakandans call her the Panther goddess and use her sacred animal as their protector, the Black Panther. So the Black Panther could technically be the first avatar we've seen in the MCU. He could be the avatar of Bast. But as we mentioned before, for these gods to be classified as wizards, they would need to originate on Earth or come from a different dimension. It is possible that Bast and the others come from another dimension. But we've seen the beings from other dimensions in Doctor Strange. Beings like Dormammu seem completely incompatible with our dimension. Also, protecting Earth from outside dimensional interference is exactly what the Sorcerer Supreme employs an army of sorcerers to do. I think that if Bast were from another reality, then the Ancient One would have stepped in to kick her out hundreds of years ago. And that is why I think the Egyptian gods fall into our third category: aliens.
proof of extraterrestrial intervention.
In the MCU, we have seen a multitude of alien species and several extraterrestrials who achieved godlike status. The Grandmaster, for instance, is seen as kind of a god on his planet, with worshippers at his beck and call. He even hints that he is extremely old.
On any other world, I'd be like millions of years old. But here on Sakaar,
and Thanos spent a whole movie becoming a god. He's related to an Eternal and has a cult of people who worship him.
No other being has ever had the might to wield not one, but 2 Infinity Stones.
We can even see a creature like Venom being considered something of a god. Venom, now in the MCU, is an alien from a literal alternate dimension. So assuming he functions like he does in the Sony movies, he shares similar traits with Khonshu. Both have somewhat parasitic relationships with their hosts. Their hosts can hear their voice in their heads, and they can control the body movements of their host and fester their mind. But our first understanding of MCU gods started off with the pantheon from Norse mythology. Thor, Loki, Odin, these guys, etc. When introducing gods into the early MCU in 2010, it was hard to fit supernatural divinity into an already technologically grounded world, so the gods became aliens. In the first Thor movie, this is how Thor explains magic to Jane.
Your ancestors called it magic, and you call it science. Well, I come from a place where they're one and the same thing.
And that sentiment is carried throughout the movies when Peter tells Mysterio,
Thor was a myth, and now I study him in my physics class.
Thor and Loki call Asgard and the 8 nearest planets realms, making it seem mystical. But we can see Asgard in its entirety in Thor Ragnarok, and It's a planet with foundations that got blown up. The Bifrost and the Devil's Anus aren't magical, they're just expressways that lead to this planet.
That looks like a collapsing neutron star inside of an Einstein-Rosen bridge.
Now the other 8 realms are also just objects in outer space. Muspelheim is a fire lava planet, Nidavellir is a star, and Midgard is just their name for Earth. They're just other planets in the galaxy with extraterrestrials living on them. In the TV series Loki, Mobius even lets Loki know that he's not a big deal.
Odin, god of the heavens, Asgard, mystical realm beyond the stars. Because if you think too hard about where any of us came from, who we truly are, it sounds kind of ridiculous.
Now, like the Eternals, the Norse gods had similar methods of deification. In Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Skye says to Phil Coulson,
Asgardians are aliens from another planet that visited us thousands of years ago.
That's where our Norse mythology comes from.
Most likely, this is what happened with the Egyptian gods too when they visited Earth many millennia ago. Now, just like we saw the Norse tomb and the temples in First Avenger, Mark Spector mentions the tomb of Ammit and became Khonshu's avatar at his temple. The hosts of Khonshu and Ammit speak the same way of realms referring to Egyptian mythology. They speak of their heavens and refer to it as the field of reeds. Judging by how the Norse gods function, I'm willing to bet this is just another name for a very pleasant grassy planet. Or if you go to the underworld, or Duat, to get judged by Anubis, I'm sure that's just some gloomy, depressing planet that's just filled with people arguing about the Last Jedi or something. The Norse gods are also aliens that have the ability to use magic. Loki is dubbed as the god of mischief and has magic to shapeshift and cause illusions. The All-Mother Frigga taught Loki magic that she learned from witches. This also allowed her to see that Thor was actually a different Thor.
I was raised by witches, boy.
I'm totally from the future.
Although Thor only has thunder and lightning powers, his ability can also transfer to human beings.
Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor.
And we'll see more of this in Thor: Love and Thunder when Jane becomes the mighty Thor. All of them have the ability to magic themselves into their costumes. So what does the ability to transfer your skills, change into a costume, and see what a person's soul sound like? Hosting avatars. We haven't seen Khonshu's and Ammit's exact magic being used in the MCU before, but the Egyptian gods are most likely aliens from one of those several millions of planets in our galaxy, who, like the Norse gods, visited us a millennia ago and now are back to seek vengeance and use humanity for their own twisted ends. But this alien origin actually makes the most sense for Bast. Millions of years ago, Wakanda was struck by a meteor made entirely of vibranium, meaning that vibranium is alien in nature. It's also purple, like the heart-shaped herb and the spirit realm. And I'm pretty sure if we ever saw a vision of Bast, she would be purple too. So it seems like Bast, the entity Bast, originates from that Wakandan vibranium meteor. And maybe the other Egyptian gods come from the same vibranium meteor. So here's where this connects to Moon Knight. The hero's origin is that he died in the desert and Khonshu resurrected him. And we've already seen that the power of Bast allows her to resurrect her avatars in an afterlife. So it would make sense that all of these African gods with similar powers and an affinity for avatars would originate from the same place. Now, in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, this connection to the spirit realm and resurrection could mean that we could see the return of one Erik Killmonger. In the comics, Killmonger died, but he was brought back on something called the Resurrection Altar. And because we've already seen the supernatural spirit plane in these movies, I don't think it's too big of a stretch for the same resurrections we see in Moon Knight to be employed with Erik Killmonger. And finally, there is precedent for this in the comics. In Jeff Lemire's stellar 2016 Moon Knight series, Khonshu tells Mark that he and the other gods are from across space-time. Although, that could have been one of Mark's hallucinations. The book actually shows him shifting in and out of reality. But also, in the brilliant Jason Aaron Thor run, we see a place called Omnipotent City. It's a place where all the gods from different worlds are able to meet up. And it's located in outer space. So, what do you think of our theory? Let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.